I kind of love retro VFX things. That's often what I cover at befores and afters. Then and Now is really interesting because it's this idea for FMX that literally I came up with at exactly the same time that the team from FMX came up with, which boggles my mind. We were all at Annecy, and I was ready to pitch an idea to FMX to have some old school practical effects, miniatures, mechanical effects type speakers to speak at FMX. And then, kind of in this meeting, the FMX team said that sort of thing. And then I said, here are my notes for my pitch to you. And it was literally the same idea. And so I just think what's really interesting about that is it was meant to be. What I did hear from Jake is that it's a film that is a big Marvel film, but kind of goes back to a little bit of an older style look and feel, right? The characters are more grungy. They're not actually all magical superheroes. So I understand there's a bit more of an old school look and feel to the visual effects. Now, that doesn't mean they don't use modern techniques, but it actually fits the then and now track really well because it's, well, how did we used to do this kind of work? And how can we use modern tools to give it that look and feel, which complements, say, the production design or the cinematography? So actually, I'm really looking forward to hearing how Jake shares how the old school look was achieved. Begonia is coming to do a live makeup effects prosthetic wound session uh, right in front of an audience so that I can talk to her about her work in different productions while she also actually applies this makeup effect, so that we can see how she does it, but also find out about her work history. I really felt like in the past couple of years for then and now, anything where it's very tangible and people feel like they can touch something or, be near something like a stop motion puppet or, anything you can get your hands on has really resonated well with the audience. And part of that is we all work in modern digital visual effects, which is very much looking at a computer, but we still have this love, for old school visual effects, and makeup effects clearly is still in that realm. Well, Perfect Storm just happens to be celebrating its 25th anniversary in 2025. So in the year 2000, when it came out, ILM had worked on some big films, of course, including, say, Twister in 1996, and, lots of other CG creatures and digital environments. But there wasn't really a big film with crazy water simulations until The Perfect Storm. And basically, ILM had to invent technology to realize all different kinds of waves and swell and spray and ocean. And, these were the days where you could kind of tinker with off the shelf software, but you had to invent ways of actually uh, visualizing it, actually simulating it, and rendering it. And ILM was inventing all of those things together. There's also a huge practical half of The Perfect Storm, which I think is really interesting. So we're bringing the original visual effects supervisor, Stefen Fangmeier, over to talk about both the shooting of The Perfect Storm, but also all the different technology that ILM was inventing to make the film possible. Nuke is obviously the sort of main compositing tool used in visual effects. It has a really interesting beginning at Digital Domain, where the studio, a brand new studio, basically in the mid 90s, invented Nuke and then kept tinkering at it, made it a brilliant tool for in-house, then looked to market it. Eventually, it was Foundry that did the job of selling it to other studios, and Nuke's just become basically the tool. One of those key technology developments in the history of visual effects. So Jonathan Egstad, who was at Digital Domain in those early days, is actually now back at Foundry, which I think is a really interesting lineage. And that's why we've got him coming over to talk about, well, what were the early days of Nuke? How did that even get developed? And then what have you been doing more recently at Foundry, which I think a lot of people in the room, if they're compositors, will find very really interesting. People who have done the hard yards in visual effects, they want to share their work with the community. And maybe visual effects supervisors who have been around for a long time, they're often stunned that things they're talking about that might have been done in the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, they're actually problems that artists still face today. In recent years, I think people like Mike Fink and Phil Tippett and Kim Libreri have found that when they've been talking to people in the audience. They're like, oh, I remember we had to tackle that on The Matrix. So I do think it's really interesting for some of those speakers to hear that the problems they did try and solve so long ago are actually still around.